All right. For those who are joining us now in our 120 segment of this hour, I am introducing folks from the Mennonite Mobile Canning Committee. And this was an article that I read about in the Tri State Neighbor and was just very curious. What does this all entail? Because it doesn't sound like the canning most of us are used to in our kitchens. And I'd like to introduce Joe Miller and Maynard Knepp. I think I have your names right. And I'm going to ask you guys to introduce yourselves. I'm going to start with you, Joe. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do with this operation.
It's good to be with you, Bridget. Great to have this opportunity to share together. So I have served for 25 years as a Mennonite pastor across the United States in a couple of locations, and then had this opportunity to work with our Mennonite Central Committee mobile canner. And so now I serve half time as a bishop in the Mennonite church, and then my other half I serve with the mobile canner.
Excellent. Maynard, how about yourself?
Yeah, I'm been involved with the mobile canner since 2006, and my job is to raise resources, money to purchase the meat for local communities to do the canning. And I'm also a hobby farmer. I have a small farm that I work at Hillsboro, Kansas, and run some cattle livestock.
All right, you are hands-on in the operation, and that's going to lead us to a lot more questions about like where you're sourcing meat and so forth. But first of all, gentlemen, I'm going to start with Maynard. Can you describe what you're doing in this mobile canner operation? I mean, in my head, like I said, I'm thinking about the jars that I use in my home kitchen when I'm canning at the end of my garden season, but that's not what you're doing. Can you give us a better description?
Yeah, this is a mobile cannery that is in a tractor trailer. And Joe, I think it's around 45 years that it's been in operation, and it goes from community to community where people raise money to buy meat that is USDA inspected, and local communities get together with volunteers and pay for the meat and do the canning.
When you are talking about gathering up all these volunteers, Joe, how many communities do you go to? How many volunteers do you need in each community to run this operation? Because you're starting from ground zero, correct? I mean, this is just boxed beef or pork coming in that you're working with, correct?
That's correct. The one thing that is a huge advantage is that we have been canning actually for 70 years, and many of the communities, all of the communities that we go to have canned annually. So they have a real great base of support in each community. They have local canning committees that organize their home community. So we figure about 150 people per day for canning the meat. And that's all the way, you're exactly right, from raw meat that comes off a reefer, and we process it. And as Maynard said, it's USDA inspected, so inspectors are there most of the time. And then it's boxed up and then sent to our warehouse in Pennsylvania for shipping around the world.
I'd see. And you said that you go from community to community across the area. How far is that reach? How far out do you guys go from community to community?
So the furthest north we get is Freeman, South Dakota, and we go down to Oklahoma, and Kansas is as far west as we get. And then we go all the way across the eastern part of the United States to Virginia and up into New York State. So we go to 30 different communities. Almost all of them are Amish or Mennonite, Hutterite communities.
Okay.
Wow.
So Maynard, I'm going to ask, can you give me a little background? How did this process start? If you guys have been doing this for 70 years, and maybe if I'm asking the wrong person, let me know, but how did this start, and what was the size and scope then versus what you're doing now?
Yeah, Joe would probably have a better answer to that. It started in my own home community in Hillsboro, Kansas, where a group of people were aware that there's protein needed for relief. We're an organization that's been doing relief work for over, well, 102 years. And so there was a recognition that there needed to be protein, and many of our communities are producers of meat. And so this was one way to get protein to communities. But Joe would have probably a better response to that.
Okay.
Well, yeah, so it's exactly right that after World War II, we Mennonites recognized that there was a terrible need in Europe for just a lot of hunger, and we started shipping meat to Europe. And then over time, we realized that while Europe didn't need canned meat anymore, we started to shift in realizing that many countries where there's refugee camps or there's been war just needed protein. So we now ship to many different countries. We ship to partners in each location who are on the ground and know the needs and are able to make sure that the meat is used in correct ways and good ways. One of the example would be that we ship quite a bit of meat into Ethiopia, the country in Africa, Ethiopia, but it is going to people who have had to flee Sudan and fled into Ethiopia. So there are huge refugee camps there. And then we send quite a bit of meat. That's just one location where we would send meat.
Okay, there's going to be a lot of questions off of that. Oh, go ahead, Maynard.
I would follow up on that. The way I got involved was that I was asked to go to Burundi in Africa after the genocide in 2006, or the Hutu-Tutsi conflict, where millions of people were genocided. And there was a tremendous need there, and there had been meat shipped there for a food for work program. And I was asked to go there to see where the meat goes, how it is used, and how it affects people. And it literally was a life-changing experience for me, and decided that I wanted to get involved. And it was a tremendous program that I really didn't know a lot about. But when I went to see and meet the recipients and hear the thank yous and how it impacted their community was amazing.
So with this process starting out, we're going to need to visit a little bit more about where you start with your volunteers, how many funds need to be raised, how many volunteers you need at a site, and then really walking through all the way from the time that meat is thawed until it's canned, what that process looks like through the trailer. We're about to hit the bottom of the hour, though, and so we need to touch base with some of our sponsors, et cetera, before we get a chance to do that. And when we return, we're going to continue this discussion, and we're visiting with Maynard and Joe. They are very helpful in answering where this originated, this idea, and how we got to where we are today. And so the question I'm going to ask is, Joe, I heard you mention, and I think Maynard did too, that this all originated with the Mennonite communities back after World War II. Since that time, how has this changed? I mean, you have a semi-trailer that moves around. What used to happen in this process versus where you're at today?
Go ahead, Maynard. You can.
Well, what used to happen is in local communities would bring in, they'd bring their cattle, their livestock into, for instance, my community in Hillsborough, Kansas, they'd bring the livestock right to the fairgrounds, and they'd be slaughtered and processed, meat cut off the bone, everything was done right there. And now because of the changes in USDA laws and in our shipping requirements, of course, we have switched over to this mobile cannery, which is an all stainless steel trailer. And we bring in meat that comes from a packing plant that is all USDA certified meat comes in, fresh meat. And this year here in Hillsborough, we brought in 80,000 pounds. It cost us about $1.80 a pound to bring it in here, and then it costs us about what, Joe, I think 50 cents a can to have it canned. For the cost of the can and the fuel and everything to run the boilers that are in this mobile canner.
And I was kind of wondering how this all kind of started. Like when you said it went back 70 years ago after World War II. Where were you getting the meat from then? Was it locally brought in, and then now it's been, kind of switched into the USDA?
Yeah, yeah. It
Yeah,
used to be
yeah, that,
just farmers would bring in their livestock. In my home community, it was, farmers would bring their livestock in, and it was processed right there at the fairgrounds.
And what about with the meat? When it goes into the can, are you cooking it once you can it, or is it being cooked beforehand?
yeah. So we put it in raw and then seal it, and then we put it into huge pressure cookers, and so the meat is actually cooked as part of our about an hour and a half, 2 hour process. And so that cooked meat, all we add to it is just a pinch of salt to each can. And we normally use chicken or turkey thighs. We can do pork and beef, but mostly we're doing poultry. And so the only product in the can of meat is the actual canned meat that's boneless. A pinch of salt. We seal it, and then under extreme high pressure cook it. One of the advantages to having the meat cooked before we send it out is that in some places where we're sending the meat for relief, there is no place to cook. So a person can open up the can and eat it as it is because it's pre-cooked.
I see. And then that kind of leads into my follow-up question with it. You said, some places where you're sending it to don't have the ability to cook it or the means to. Do you only ship outside of the United States, or did this start internally and then you've moved out to a more global level?
No, it started internationally.
Yeah, yeah.
Go ahead, Joe.
Okay. Well, I was just going to say, yeah, it started to send to Europe right after the war. I think Mennonites recognized there was a lot of suffering that had occurred, and all across Europe, from Holland to just everywhere. So we started shipping canned meat there. And then we do say to each canning community that we encourage them to keep 10% of what they can for their local community. So many of the canning committees will do that. They'll give the meat to food banks or whatever they decide they want to use it for. But so we do encourage each community to keep 10% for their local use.
Oh, that's great.
So Maynard, if I could ask, walk us through the process. So the meat shows up. How many volunteers do you need at a site in order to begin this process? And how many hours does it take to get through what you're doing? Because you said roughly 80,000 pounds. How long does that take to get everything canned?
Yeah, we can can around 8,000 pounds a day. And it usually starts like at 5 o'clock in the morning. The first workers would come in and they'll bring the raw meat out of the refrigerated trailer, and it's put through a grinding process, and it gets ground, and then it gets put up and dumped into a warm up where it's warmed up in a container, and people line up. It takes, I think, 8 people, if I'm not wrong, Joe, that put the meat into the cans, and you can see the picture right now. The cans go on this conveyor into the sealer, and there's usually 3 guys on the sealer, 1 to do the sealing and 2 to put it in these big containers that go into these big cookers. And here you can see the cans being put into the cookers. And there's, I think, 8, right, Joe, in this particular trailer that we have 8 cookers, and they are all everything's computerized. It has to be a certain temperature, has to be cooked for a certain period of time. And this product, when it comes out, is a great product, and it can be stored in below 0 temperatures, or it can be in 100-degree plus temperatures. So it can get it. You can take it anywhere in the world in any temperature. And
how long is your shelf life on it, Maynard?
Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
We don't know. We've had it for some time, for some years. We do kind of run through it, but we've never had a recall on our meat, which we're so grateful for. But it seems, I mean, kind of indefinitely, really. So it can last quite a few number of years, but we will ship it out pretty consistently so that our
Hmm.
warehouse just has always some coming in and some going out.
I
So,
see.
so Joe, I want to know, when do you start getting ready? So you said the furthest north you all come is to Freeman, South Dakota. How far in advance do you begin the fundraising efforts, setting up volunteers, booking that trailer to show up? Is this a year in advance until you're ready for this unit to arrive? How would that process look?
Yeah, that's a great question. We will start, our actual canning season, where have 4 young men who volunteer their time from October to May. So that's our canning season. And so we will start planning immediately after a season is finished. And then in the summertime, in late summer, we really ramp up and start contacting each local committee and letting them know what the plans are for the next year. It's pretty consistent year to year, so everybody sort of knows what they're doing. But we also need to, in the summer, we make sure that the canner is repaired and working well. We have to get the scales calibrated. So there are all sorts of things we do in the summertime. And then we start contacting the committees and we lay out a schedule. So we have a schedule that's well in place before we even start, from what are the dates that each community will have the canner come. It takes about 3 hours to set up and then take the canner down. What we do is we pull this semi trailer in and we can open up one side of the canner and we seal that into the building that's also, like we keep saying, USDA inspected. And so, yeah, the planning, we're constantly connecting with the local committees, especially as we get close to their time of canning. The other thing we do is we have to have we have to inform the USDA regional offices where we will be, and so they can schedule their inspectors there to come and be there. USDA has to come and do a pre-inspection, and so there's a lot of detail that
Yeah.
goes on there. We feel so blessed to have a great relationship with USDA. We respect that they're really trying to have safe food, and we honor that and try. We see USDA as a real partner to us, and yeah, it has felt like a really good collaboration.
So as you mentioned, being that partner with USDA, and it's not easy to have an inspector on hand. So you do plan quite a bit ahead. They are doing a pre-inspection and a post-inspection. And when they do all of that, what's your output? How many cans are you're doing 8,000 pounds of meat a day. You're usually having 80,000 pounds of meat on hand. How many cans is that? Because I'm not here to do Midwest math. I just want to, you guys can break that down for me.
Yeah. Well, we think about it's not a perfect 1-to-1 ratio, but 1 pound, our cans will hold 1.5 pounds of meat. So, if you have, I won't do the math, but if you have 8,000 pounds of chicken or turkey that you will get, you know, uh, a little less, you'll get a
Sure,
little less than the 8,000 cans,
sure.
but it's pretty remarkable how fast the process works. And then we have to also mark every can, the date that it was canned and the location it was canned. So we are able, if there ever was a problem with unsafe food, that we could track back and pull all the food that had been canned in a certain time and location just for safety purposes. Yes, the USDA, they are there, and Normally, our guys are trained, the 4 volunteer canners who are with the canner, they have training, USDA training on how to do thermal cooking. And so they're certified and normally they serve for 2 years with the canner and travel with it and manage it for us. And then we as supervisors will go out, okay, from time to time and just check in and make sure things are going well.
Great. And Maynard, I got a couple questions here for you. Is it just the one mobile unit, or do you have multiple mobile canning
No,
units?
no, we just have the one mobile unit, and it's the only one that I'm aware of in the world that exists.
Wow.
Okay, wow. And then kind of follow up with that, from your experience, what's the best way to get food into the hands for those who need it?
Well, we respond to when we are asked to ship. We don't just take meat out and distribute it. We respond to the needs. We have partners, for instance, in Ukraine right now that have a tremendous need for protein, and so we've shipped there. We have a Brethren in Christ church in Cuba that has a tremendous need for protein, and so we're actually shipping from our warehouse here. We'll be shipping into Cuba to the Brethren in Christ church there.
Yeah, I might add to what Maynard said that our organization, Mennonite Central Committee, we talk about 3 things that we really get focused on. One is relief, and then development and peace. And so we see the meat canning and the food relief is a small part, really actually a very small part of what we do as an organization. We put a lot more energy into development. So we are working hard at ag development, how people can help, farmers can feed themselves in the various places around the world. Last summer, as an organization, we invited a Tanzanian agriculturalist to spend 6 weeks working with Amish farmers and learning together how farming can take place using animal power. So that's the kind of thing that we're also involved in, is the development, so that people, the old saying, people can help feed themselves.
Oh, great.
Well,
And Joe, this
Joe,
is my go ahead, Maynard.
I would also follow up in Ethiopia, where they had a tremendous drought and people were really suffering because of the weather, the climate. People were eating their livestock because they were desperate. And so there was meat shipped into that area to help out. But then the development, after the relief, the development comes to also provide a goat program in the development and the care for goats, and how an education on how to produce their own meat rather than just relying on relief. That's like Joe said, it's a very important part of the relief work, is also development and education, and do it in a just way.
I see. And then my last thing, and I'll let Bridget get the last word in here after me, but can people donate their food through you guys? And can they donate anything other than meat? Do you do anything outside of that?
Go ahead, Maynard.
Well, no, they can't just donate their own meat unless it's run through a USDA packing plant somewhere. And we have in the past, we've done that, where we've processed hogs when the trailer was taken up to Winnipeg, Canada, and where they processed around the clock there, and people actually donated their hogs when the hog price was really cheap, and we did can pork. But the best way is to give resources, financial resources, to where the local committees can go out and buy the meat. And of course, there's a cost in the logistics in getting this shipped. I mean, you can't just take it from our location here into Ukraine or Cuba or somewhere in Latin America without expenses. So we always welcome financial assistance in getting our product to where needed most around the world, and where we were asked to ship it.
Well, to Joe Miller and Maynard Knepp, Thank you both. You are part of the Mennonite Central Committee and the Mobile Canning Unit. You answered so many great questions for us, and we appreciate it. And for those who wish to reach out, remember, you can find them with the Mennonite Central Committee. We are going to take this break to visit with American Ag Network and get an update